Hello and welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. Today is Monday, May 13th. I'm Jason Shabilsky alongside Kirian Sprecher. Today we'll be discussing what we learned from roster cuts around the league, including Veronica Burton and Brenna Maxwell being let go. We'll also give you some bold predictions for the 2024 season, and we'll preview the first week of the regular season games and talk about what we'll be looking for. Those looking to keep up with news as the regular season gets underway can visit rotowire.com/WNBA. And if you have any fantasy draft or lineup questions with this season upon us, live viewers can use the comment section to get those in, and we'll try and answer them as we go along. All right, so as roster cuts came in, probably one of the biggest surprises that I saw was Veronica Burton being let go by the Wings. She didn't have a major impact in 2023, but it seemed like she would be able to handle a bigger role this year with Satu Sabali hurt for most of the year.
Yeah, definitely one of the biggest surprises of roster cutdown, probably the biggest surprise. But as we've been alluding to on this show in its infancy, it's Jaylen Brown's season. She was operating under a training camp contract. She's bounced around plenty of leagues in many different countries. Finally got an opportunity in the WNBA again, and she was stellar in her preseason debut, scoring 21 points on 7 for 15 from the field. She made 3 3-pointers, added 5 boards and assists and a steal in 30 minutes. And right away, we kind of we're like, this isn't just like a little like shot in the dark. She started that preseason game, clear path to playing time. And then the cut of Burton just solidified Brown's role. I would be shocked if she wasn't in the starting lineup, honestly, on opening night for the Wings. And then, the other repercussions of that, you have J.C. Sheldon, a rookie out of Ohio State, who's going to come in and have plenty of room for playing time. She's more of a 3-point specialist. And so especially like early in her career, I don't know how high of a ceiling she'll have in fantasy. And I think Brown kind of does a little bit of everything. She adds the boards, a little bit of a playmaker. So I think Brown has a higher fantasy ceiling than Sheldon. But Brown and Sheldon, with that Burton release, their values are going through the roof.
Yeah, it was interesting during the preseason where some teams treated it like a regular season game. It felt like the Fever were kind of doing that, where they were giving their regular starters a lot of minutes. And there were also teams who treated it just like a preseason game, like you normally would. Like the Liberty rested most of their starters for the second half. But the Wings seemed to be one of those teams that played a little bit more seriously during the preseason. So the fact that Jaylen Brown had a starting role was really encouraging. And it's also validating for her and for us as experts to see Jaylen Brown make that roster. And I think that the sky's the limit for her this year, especially with Crystal Dangerfield out of the picture after she was traded to Atlanta. I think that Jaylen Brown and J.C. Sheldon have plenty of opportunities coming their way in the Dallas backcourt. And also, not to be overlooked is Lou Lopez Seneschal. She was the number 5 pick in 2023 and didn't play after having knee surgery, but she was really good overseas during the offseason, and she was a really solid college contributor. So if she can translate her game to the WNBA, I think that the Wings have several players who we really haven't seen make that big of an impact in the WNBA. And we haven't even mentioned Maddie Siegrist yet. She was the 3rd overall pick in 2023, absolutely dominant in college, but she just didn't have many opportunities for playing time as a rookie, which is the case for a lot of first year players around the league. But I think that the Wings will have a new look, and they have a lot of promise, but it's also a lot of risk as it comes to their real life success.
Yeah, and the last thing that I just want to add is that Jaylen Brown, like while she is a rookie, and this will be her first like WNBA regular season action, like the other two names you said, Shaw and Siegrist, they're second-year players, but they're a lot younger than Brown. Brown is like a veteran. She's played professional basketball, and so that's why I'm higher on her in fantasy is just because I feel like she has that veteran presence and she's going to come in and she's going to make an impact right away. Like you don't keep a 26, 27-year-old rookie if you're not going to like give her a bunch of playing time right away. Like that would just seem kind of silly in my opinion. So I feel like the fact if she was going to make the roster, she was going to make the roster to play and play a lot, at least early on. So Jaylen Brown, while I like all of those other names, I think it might take them a little while to like figure out their role for the Wings. And I think Jaylen Brown solidified her role with a
Yeah,
great preseason.
yeah, absolutely. I updated the projections and rankings after Jaylen Brown's preseason debut, and she's now in the mid 60s, which is just around Maddie Siegrist, I think just above her. And if she can have a starting role, Veronica Burton didn't have a big role last year. She averaged about 2 points, two assists per game. But if Jaylen Brown can play during the regular season like she did during the preseason and overseas over the past few years, I think that she could be a really unique presence for the team.
100%. This is already looking like a historic WNBA season between attendance and viewership and the new charter flights being phased in and all of the on-court talent with the rookies coming in. So let's get a little crazy. Nothing official has happened yet. So let's start off with some bold predictions.
So let's start off with a player who has drawn most of the offseason headlines, and that's Caitlin Clark. We can't seem to go a show without prominently featuring her, which for good reason. She's incredibly talented. But my first bold prediction is that she breaks the single season 3 point record as a rookie. So the record right now is 128 made 3 pointers in a season. That was set by Sabrina Ionescu last year. So Clark will have the benefit of a 40-game season again this year, which kind of inflates the numbers. But with the record being only 1 year old, it's not maybe not the boldest of predictions, but especially as a rookie, I think that Clark will have plenty of opportunities from beyond the arc. So Ionescu last year, she shot 44.8% from beyond the arc, which is just absolutely mind-boggling. Her overall record was still aided by the fact that she was able to play in 40 games, but so I'm not saying that like Clark will reach Ionescu's efficiency, at least yet, but I think that the volume will certainly be there. She got shots up very like just a ton of shots during the preseason. And in order to break the record, she'd have to average 3.2 3 pointers per game, which like for who Caitlin Clark is, it sounds very achievable. So if she can get enough open looks during a game, I'm excited to see what she can do, and I think that the 3 point record is very attainable for her early on.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm the Fever, if I'm Caitlin Clark, like I feel like she should be attempting around 10 threes per game. So to break that record, she would only need to shoot 32% from deep, and I think she's a lot better shooter than that. So I feel like that's a pretty it is I feel like it's a bold prediction to say a rookie is going to break a record. Like I feel like that's fair, but I do think that you slid in a little on the safe side with that one. And if she doesn't break it this year, she'll probably break it next year, and then she'll probably continue to break her own record, as we've seen with Steph Curry and the NBA. And I think another incredible point that you brought up was the 40-game season. Like we see in other sports, as they expand the seasons, records get broken like crazy just because there's more opportunities. So for my Caitlin Clark bold prediction, I believe at some point she will lead the W in both points and assists per game for an entire season. And possibly she'll do that multiple times throughout her career. But looking back at past performances, this feat just seems a little too impossible for her to accomplish as a rookie. The GOAT, Diana Taurasi, in 2013 finished second in both points and assists per game. And that's the closest anybody has gotten to leading the league in both points and assists. I went all the way back to 2007. That's just because that's what ESPN limited me to. So I'm sorry if before then anything happened, but we're just going back to 2017. So for the last like 15 to 20 years, no one has done this yet. I don't think Clark will quite get there, but I will go out on a limb and say that she'll finish in top 5 in both points and assists as a rookie. That's probably not a super bold prediction, but for any normal rookie, she's not a normal rookie. Some other fun Caitlin Clark odds that I found on DraftKings. She's plus 1,200 to win MVP. That's fourth highest behind Asia Wilson, Brianna Stewart, and Alyssa Thomas, which is kind of surprising. And she's plus 3,000 to break the WNBA all-time scoring record for a single game, which is 54 points at some point during her rookie campaign. These are pretty astronomical odds. Are you thinking about sprinkling any of those?
So for MVP, I'm thinking probably not. I'll kind of touch on this a little bit later, but there are some non-Brianna Stewart players that I like for MVP, but I don't think that Clark will really be in the conversation as a rookie. Uh, I think that she'll have a really solid year and lead the Fever in a lot of categories, but it feels like in terms of like scoring and assists, like you were talking about leading the league in both categories, it feels like Courtney Vandersloot has to retire at some point before that's made possible. It feels like there's just a little ways to go before she reaches quite the absolute top tier of talent in the league. But I think that she'll be a really solid contributor early on. I think that for breaking the single game scoring record at some point, with it being plus 3,000 odds, I do think that I will sprinkle a little bit of money on that one, just because the odds. I think that the Fever will be a lot more competitive this year, but I don't think that the team is quite at a level where they'll be able to give Clark much rest, kind of similar to what the Aces did last year. Now, I'm certainly not comparing the Fever to the Aces in that regard, but I don't think that there will be very many games where Caitlin Clark is resting for the final few minutes because it's such a blowout. I think that she'll be playing 30 plus minutes a night on most nights. And if she gets hot from beyond the arc in any given game, I think that the all time scoring record for a single game is like at least within reach or at least enough to be plus 3,000 for some point during the regular season.
Yeah, I feel like to win MVP, the Fever would probably need to finish like top two. Like they need to have a better record than the Aces or the Liberty. And I just don't really see that happening. I'm sure Clark will get an MVP or a handful of MVPs by the time her career is over. I just don't think it'll happen her rookie season. The single game scoring record is super interesting to me. Just because I feel like, with the hoopla surrounding her, right? Like I feel like if she scores 30 and a half in the first half, and maybe it's not really a close game, like I feel like the team, her players, the coaches, I feel like everyone might just be like, well, leave her out there for a little bit longer. So I feel like there's that like added motivation like to sprinkle a little bit on there just because I feel like the Fever in Indiana and the WNBA as a whole is playing into the Clark madness, right? Like everybody wants Clark to be successful because that's going to mean the WNBA is successful. 54 points is a lot of points. So I don't know. At plus 3,000 is probably a good mark, but it would be fun to have that on just in case that happens. Another Caitlin Clark odd that was on DraftKings is she's minus 800 to win Rookie of the Year, so she's basically a shoe-in. Cameron Brink is second at plus 1,400, and Angel Reese is plus 3,000. So that's about as a sure thing as it can get. Barring injury, Clark will probably win Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, and while I do think that she'll win Rookie of the Year, I don't love a future odd of minus 800. It feels like the risk reward is just it's just not there. You obviously like Caitlin Clark has been healthy for most of her college career, and you certainly never hope for an injury. But when you're making a bet like that, there are just so many variables that could come into play that, for me, the Rookie of the Year odds just aren't worth it. I might sprinkle a little bit on Cameron Brink or Angel Reese, but I also just don't think that they will realistically be in the conversation if Clark can stay in the court. So I'm probably shying away from that one.
With the way Reese has been playing in the preseason, I feel like it would totally be worth sprinkling a little bit on. But then also, while doing that, you're probably kind of like hoping for a Caitlin Clark injury, which I would never want to do. So I'm probably staying away from that. So
Yeah.
if it's not Caitlin Clark, who do you have winning MVP this year?
So I thought about Brianna Stewart, and she's still my clear top fantasy option. But I think that Asia Wilson is probably my MVP pick for this year. She has plus 120 odds, so it's not fantastic, but it felt like one of the main detriments to Asia Wilson's stats last year was just how good the aces were, and uh, it seems like a backwards reason to not give someone the MVP award, but she didn't see as much playing time in blowouts, while Brianna Stewart was usually consistently played a full set of minutes. And I think Becky Hammon did recognize that at the end of the year. So there was the controversy of the MVP award. Asia Wilson even finished fourth in one writer's voting, but I think that Hammond realized the impact that this had, and I think that Asia Wilson herself will be playing on with a chip on her shoulder this year. So I think that she'll be out with a vengeance, and I could easily see her winning another MVP award.
Yeah, I think what would try plus money for Asia Wilson winning the MVP, I feel like is pretty good odds, considering how dominant she is when she's on the court. But I do think like the blowout factors and sharing the court with Chelsea Gray and Kelsey Plum and Jackie Young, et cetera, limits her value a little bit. For MVP, I'm going back to the title of the show, or of today's show. I'm going bold prediction: Nafissier Collier to win MVP. She's plus 3,500 right now. She finished fourth last year. She didn't get any first, second, or third place votes, so the fourth place vote finish is kind of like a kind of a little like awkward. And not really like a strong showing of like that she was even close to winning it. Um, but it was her first season back following a pregnancy, and she posted career high numbers: 21 points, 8 boards, 2 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.2 blocks. Fantastic numbers. If she repeats those numbers again, and you get the Stewie and the Wilsons of the world, their numbers drop a little as they try to chase a championship, and Collier's numbers stay solid. I think she could finish top 3 easily. I think this is just too high of a number for like a clear cut number 1. We're starting to see the wave of super teams, right? And that's going to limit the MVP odds in my mind. And I feel like Collier is still like the number 1 player on the team. And these odds are just way too high for me not to take. And then I'm sort of on that same subject. My other bold prediction is I have the Liberty dethroning the Aces this year. That's plus 240 on DraftKings. Even with Seattle forming a super team and Phoenix putting together a veteran roster full of winners, I still think this is a 2-team race, and Vegas agrees with me. The Aces are minus 105 and to win the title, and the Liberty are plus 240, like I just mentioned, and then the third highest is Connecticut at plus 1,200. So once again, even with some roster changes throughout the league, this is a 2-team race for the championship, and I feel like New York was solid last year, and they were clearly the number 2 team, but they were still a step below the Aces, and I wasn't surprised. Even with some injuries, Chelsea Gray missed some time in the finals last year. Even with like being limited, the Aces still cleared the Liberty by a mile. But I think with a full year of team chemistry, camaraderie, hanging out, going to practices, doing all that stuff together, that super team of Ionescu, Stewie, and Jonquel Jones is going to be better this year, and they're going to be better equipped to knock off the Aces.
Yeah, I think that one of my biggest question marks with the Liberty this year is just whether Courtney Vandersloot can keep up her high level of play. She was one of my bust candidates that I had in last week's article on the site, but she still has the upside of in terms of fantasy, but she had enough like performances that just kind of lagged behind where she was held below 20 ESPN fantasy points quite a bit, which doesn't necessarily translate to real life success. But if the scoring isn't there on some nights, then you wonder whether New York has the depth around her to kind of pick up some of that slack. Where they have Stewie and they have UNESCO, it's a very good start. But I'm wondering if they'll be able to quite keep pace with the Aces. But definitely bold.
And I think defensively is where Vandersloot really like lacked in the postseason last year. Like Vandersloot trying to guard Chelsea Gray and Jackie Young and Kelsey Plum was not a pretty sight for the veteran. So I think that they brought in Laney. The Liberty brought in a couple of other depth pieces. Kayla Thornton was a really strong defender in the postseason last year. So I feel like the Liberty can score with them. I feel like it'll be a matter of if they can hold them to less than 100 points every game. And Vandersloot is like their weakest link defensively for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also betting against the Aces to three-peat, not necessarily because I don't think that the Aces are the best team in the league, but I just think that it's tough to three-peat. They've stayed pretty healthy over the past few years. So Chelsea Gray's still dealing with her foot injury, so those things are already starting to creep in. Even though Candace Parker wasn't available for most of last year, it felt like they still had her for the start of the season, and so I think that more players will have to like step up from the get go this year. But I am betting on the Seattle Storm at plus 1400 to win it all. Um, the the Storm have joined the ranks of WNBA super teams this year. They had encouraging pieces last year in Jewel Lloyd and Ezzy Magbagor, but they still finished 11th in the overall standings. They've now added Neka Owumake and Skylar Diggins Smith. So I think that the team really has a shot to compete with the top levels of WNBA teams. My reservations about Seattle are pretty similar to the ones that I had with the Liberty last year in terms of overall team chemistry. So you have a lot of veteran players coming in Owumake and Diggins Smith. They've proven that they can be really solid contributors when they're given opportunities, but you just kind of wonder whether the overall workload will be there. Uh, but last year, I was kind of shying away from the Liberty as a betting team because they were mainly considered a top two team with the Aces last year, and rightfully so. It wound up being Aces Liberty in the finals. But the plus 1400 odds for the Storm, it feels like you're getting really good value there. It's the fourth highest odds in the league behind Connecticut. I also think that Connecticut will be solid this year, but when you're getting plus 1400 on the Storm, it just feels like you're kind of exploiting an underrated value right there.
Yeah, plus 1400 for a team like you said that is all intents and purposes. It's basically what the Liberty did last year with adding superstars to a star player returning. So I like your rationale there. Do we want to just do a quick rundown of our playoff teams? It looks like we just have one major difference in who we think is going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for me, the top four are kind of a lock to make the playoffs, and it seems like you feel the same way. So
Yeah.
I have the Aces, the Liberty, the Sun, and the Storm finishing in my top four. I think that at least the number four, number three slots are maybe a little bit flexible in terms of who finishes there, but it at least feels like those four teams are playoff teams.
Totally agree. After that, it gets a little bit murky. It looks like we both think the Fever, led by Caitlin Clark, will make the playoffs this year. We both think the Dream will make the playoffs. The Dream are one of my sleeper teams. I liked them a lot last year too. I'm hoping that they take another step forward this year. And then we both think the Mercury will have a huge bounce back after adding some new talent to the league in Copper, Clea Copper. So after that, we differ. I'm going with the Minnesota Lynx and my MVP candidate, Nafisir Collier, to make the playoffs. Who's your final playoffs team?
So my final playoff team is the Wings. I could really see them finishing as high as five, but I could also see them just missing the playoffs altogether. I think it'll really depend on who's able to step up in Satu Sabli's absence and how quickly. Once Sabli is back, it feels like the Wings will be among the top teams over the final 15 games of the season, but you just wonder whether that'll be too little too late. So if Jalen Brown can perform well, if Maddie Segrist steps up, Lou Lopez Seneschal, JC Sheldon, I think that the team will be in good shape. But if they're a little bit slow going, I think that they could have trouble down the stretch.
Yeah, I just really like the addition of Courtney Williams to Minnesota. I think she brings a really stabilizing presence to that backcourt, combined with a super strong front court. I just really like them as like a solid, safe team. And I feel like they should be a playoff team. I like the wings. I just think that Arike Agumbawale is by far and away their best player. And she's kind of like a scorer first, and so like I'm really interested to see how her play style fits with a bunch of new options in town. And with the Sabali injury, I just don't think right now, I don't think they're a playoff team, but Sabali comes back and I could easily see them going. All right. So before we're live again on Friday, every team in the W will have played at least once. And the Liberty and the Fever will have played twice, including a Thursday showdown that I'm super excited to watch. Caitlin Clark versus Ionescu should be absolutely superb. Three balls flying like crazy. And if you've been paying attention, you know that's my favorite part of basketball. So super excited for that Thursday matchup. But before we get ahead of ourselves, um, going to Tuesday, opening night, first game on the docket, you got New York against Washington. I think this one will probably be a blowout. So I'm looking more towards the final three games on Tuesday night. And you got Indiana versus Connecticut, Phoenix versus Las Vegas, Minnesota versus Seattle. All of these are intriguing matchups with playoff implications. DraftKings has all of these teams as favorites to make the playoffs. Minnesota's minus 200, Seattle's minus 1200. Indiana's minus 450, Connecticut's minus 2000, Phoenix is minus 300, Seattle's minus 1200. So this should be really competitive ball right away, right from the jump on opening night. And we'll kind of get to see how these new teams like compete with each other or like compete with one another against really good competition. I'm curious to see how like those six teams play out, but I'm most interested to seeing how Indiana, Phoenix, and Seattle compete with their revamped rosters. I'm mostly looking at, will Kelsey Mitchell play? She's been dealing with a little nagging injury, and if she does, how will she fit next to Caitlin Clark? Mitchell led the Fever in scoring last year. She's a great scoring option. How will that dynamic work in the backcourt? Kalea Copper's Phoenix debut. How does she fit with Taurasi and Griner? We know that Taurasi didn't like playing with Skylar Diggins-Smith so much, so we'll see how the fit with Copper is. Speaking of Diggins-Smith, she'll be making her debut for Seattle, and how will she fit with Jewel Lloyd? You know, two really ball dominant players, and then Neckham also making her Seattle debut, and how will she fit in the front court with Ezzy? Super intriguing, super excited for the season to finally get underway on Tuesday.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking this as I was looking at the preseason matchups, but the more talent gets into the WNBA, and while we're still at 12 teams this year, it feels like there isn't really a bad matchup that can happen on any given night. Even the Liberty and the Mystics, like the Mystics, I think will struggle this year without Elena Deladon. I think the Sky will probably struggle to make the playoffs, and Minnesota, Phoenix, Dallas kind of seem to be on that bubble, and same with Los Angeles. But all of those teams have a lot of really interesting talent that I'm really excited to watch this year. So there really isn't a bad game to watch. In terms of two betting lines that stand out to me for opening night, I really like Connecticut minus 5.5 against Indiana and Phoenix plus 13.5 against Las Vegas. So, like we've alluded to before, we expect the Fever to be really competitive this year. But with Brianna Jones healthy, it feels unlikely that Indiana will be able to keep up with Connecticut's veteran talent, at least on opening night. It feels like this line is kind of taken into account Caitlin Clark hype. I think that there are a lot of people who are maybe first time bettors in the WNBA who are betting on Indiana, and for good reason. Indiana, I think, will be an intriguing team to watch this year, but Connecticut is one of the top teams in the league, and I think that they'll be able to beat Indiana by at least 6. And with Phoenix against Las Vegas, the Aces retained plenty of firepower for this season, and the Mercury had the worst record in the league this year. So I can see why the line is double digits. But Phoenix has a completely new look team. They added Kalia Copper, they added Natasha Cloud, Rebecca Allen, even Nate Tibbetts will be their head coach, which he's a first time head coach at the professional level. So that'll be really interesting to see. but it feels like Chelsea Gray is unlikely to play, which could help to keep this game close. Their Mercury do have some injuries of their own between Brittany Griner and Sophie Cunningham. Cunningham was probable for the preseason game that she missed, so it seems likely that she'll play. But there was also a recent video that I saw of Brittany Griner in a walking boot and on a scooter. So I'm not sure whether she'll be available. Sometimes those things can just be precautionary, but if she is forced to miss time to start the regular season, I would probably fade this line a little bit. But if Griner is available, if Cunningham is available, I think that Phoenix can keep it at least close to a single digit game.
Yeah, I like both of those bets. I do think that the Connecticut Fever line is, like you said, a little tilted towards the Caitlin Clark side. So I do like getting on the opposite side of that as a sharp. Um, and like you said, you just got to monitor those injuries in the Vegas Phoenix game. Chelsea Gray injury obviously huge. Brittany Griner injury obviously huge. But you can check out RotoWire for the latest updates on those before placing any bets. And I just think that the other aspect of that Phoenix Las Vegas game is first regular season game. It's really hard to blow a team out, right? Like you got to be clicking on all cylinders. There's going to be some rust. There's going to be some, a little bit of bad play just because it's the first competitive game and everyone's a little amped up. So I do expect that one to be at least a little bit competitive for a while and probably finish in a single digit margin of victory.
Yeah, and especially because Candace Parker's retirement announcement was just slightly late. You wonder how Kia Stokes and Alicia Clark will be able to fill the gap right away. So I think it's at least intriguing for an opening night play. I'm just so excited that we have so many game lines to follow and player props to follow because I remember a few years ago it was incredibly hard, especially with player props, to find those. And most of the player props for tomorrow night's games haven't yet been released outside of Caitlin Clark. But I'm excited that we have those, and we'll have a gambling roundtable for a second straight year. You and I, regular contributors for that, but we'll have all of RotoWire's experts in there at some point, and we just outline the player props that we like for the night and the game lines as well. So looking forward to doing that again, and you can see that for free. At rotowire.com/WNBA.
And I just want to tell all the viewers, whoever stayed on this long, that last year Jason found a player prop bet for Emma Cannon, who had been released. It was like set at like 5.5 assists, and he had that thing in the best bets article that we publish every night that there's games in the W. And so like we're really on top of it. We're finding all of the ins and outs for you to get the best edge on the sports book. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see those, and it feels like it'll be more closely monitored by the sports books this year with Caitlin Clark there. But you never know what kind of value you'll find on those.
We'll find some value. We'll find some value.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, that wraps up our preseason coverage of the WNBA. We have regular season starting tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. And we'll be back at the end of the week, Friday at 1 p.m. Central again. We'll be just kind of breaking down some of the regular season odds and ends. So, top performers from the first few games, preview of weekend matchups that we're looking forward to. So, I'm excited to hit the ground running with the regular season.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
See you later.